for a very, very long time, queer people didn't get stories that showed them succeeding or being happy or overcoming difficulties, having triumphs, joy, celebrations. We didn't get that. We were relegated to being side characters there to teach a very valuable lesson to the main straight characters. And we either did that by being over the top, offensive stereotypes, or we were there to get sick, to get hurt, to be a warning sign for how civilization could fall or anything like that. And granted, we've come a lot further, but for a long time, science fiction and fantasy, the genre in which I write, was a very straight white male game. And there were certain rules that you had to follow. There are some very notable exceptions, obviously, but I learned coming in that the rules that have been around in this genre forever are stagnant. They hinder more than they help. So what I'm learning, and what I think a lot of queer authors and a lot of BIPOC authors are learning, is that these rules were made to be torn up and broken. Because if we adhere to how the genre came and how the genre has survived for so long, then we would be trapping ourselves into very specific boxes, and it's hard to get out of those. But if we go in and break everything on our way in, then nobody can tell us, no, you're not doing it the right way, because they're too freaked out over how much of a mess everything is. And take my book, The House in the Cerulean Sea, for example. That book is about a fat, fussy man in his 40s who is the hero of a fantasy novel. You don't get to see fat, fussy queer men being heroes of their own stories. And so being able to show the world how people really are, even in the face of the fantastical, is so important to me. And that queerness, getting to write stories where queer people get to be happy, get to succeed, and even if the road to that ending may be rocky, they get to have a happy ending just like everybody else does. I made a promise a long time ago to myself that if I was going to write about queer people, which is what I do completely, then I was going to make sure that my queer characters were given the ending that they deserve, the ending that has been so long denied for my community. As a kid, growing up queer, having ADHD, but it was undiagnosed, there was just an otherness about me, an otherness that I know so many kids in my position would have felt at the time. And that otherness, it speaks to you, it separates you, it doesn't allow you to think that you can relate to your peers in any way, shape, or form. And so with this idea of bigotry, when it comes to the magical peoples in the House in the Cerulean Sea, it's basically what a lot of us queer people or people of color experience on a very regular basis, this otherness, because we are not like other people. So I wanted to take that to an extreme and put it on a much larger scale with this idea of people being afraid of what they don't understand. And that's something that I think that many don't realize, is that fear is one of the biggest motivators towards bigotry. Fear, it doesn't need to be necessarily that you're afraid, but fear can lead to anger, it can lead to hatred, especially when left unchecked and left to rot. And you see that in the world that we live in every single day. And it seems like it should be getting better, but it seems like it's just getting worse. So with this book, I wanted to write about otherness, but in a way that was celebrated, in a way that was accepted, to show that these kids in the House in the Cerulean Sea, while different, were still just kids. There's a correlation to the real world right now with all the anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ legislation that's working its way across the country. And the one thing that I've always found fascinating in a very dark way is, why is nobody asking the kids what they want? Because people outside of their family, outside of their friends, outside of their circle of medical professionals, are trying to make changes to their lives without ever asking what the kids want. Kids are these little tiny machines, these little tiny humans that don't yet have the filter of cynicism that comes with age. And maybe they can see the evil of the world, the hubris of the world, but they don't think like adults do. They think freely. They say whatever is in their heads. And I don't know why we don't ask the kids, what do you want? These people who are trying to take away books from schools and everything like that, they're only doing that to cause harm. They're not trying to save children. They're trying to harm them. And I don't know why nobody has sat down and said, okay, what do these kids want? What do they want? It's their lives we're affecting. Why aren't we having conversations with them about what they want? And I think that most people would be very surprised about what they hear, how smart it would be, how knowledgeable, and how forthright and blunt. Because to be frank, people of my generation and above, especially on the right wing, are ruining many, many things for kids, many, many things. And it's frightening to see that. So with the House in the Cerulean Sea, I wanted to show a world that proved that differences can be celebrated, differences can be respected, even if you don't necessarily understand the differences. I can't expect somebody to see a person like Chauncey, a big green blob with tentacles and his eyes on stalks on the top of his head, and be like, oh my God, that is adorable. There might be people who would be frightened by his appearance. But if they got to know the character, if they got to know the person, they would see that Chauncey is a perpetual ball of sunshine. He's had trauma, he's had fear, he's been called a monster. But unlike some of the other children in the house, he hasn't let it hold him back because he knows that he's going to be capable of something great. And I wish all kids could feel like that. I really do. But to be frank, a lot of them don't. They don't get that kind of support. They don't get the kind of place where they can grow up and be free. I am a product of an environment just like that, where I got made fun of for reading. I got made fun of for loving to write. I got made fun of for being effeminate. I got made fun of for having undiagnosed ADHD because I didn't know when to shut up. I didn't know how to stop moving because my parents would not take me to get help for that. I had to do that on my own as I got older. And I think that we need to start thinking about what the kids want, because what we're doing now is not what they want. When I wrote this book, it was not with children in mind. I had never written a book for younger readers. All of my books prior to this have been adult, decidedly adult, because either they deal with violence or sex or anything like that. So with this book, I wasn't thinking about children's market at all. And I remember when my editor came to me when we first started editing the book, she said, you have two instances of the F word in this book, and that's my favorite word in the entire world. She goes, if you removed those two instances of that word, this book would open it up. It would open up this book to a new market, because parents, if they go to a library or they go to a bookstore, a lot of times they'll ask, is there anything in here that a kid should not be reading? Is there language? Is there something that younger readers should not? And if there is, like the F word, some parents might not read that book with their kids. And I said, okay, that's fine. You can remove those words and see what happens. And then all of a sudden I became a freaking children's author. And I don't know how that happened, because I have heard from adults and young people and kids from all over the world who have come to this book and seen part of themselves in. I spoke with a group of women in their 70s and their 80s at their church group that read this book as part of their book club. And there was one woman in there who was not happy with me. And she didn't speak the entire time. But afterwards, I got an email from her, and she was very offended by the fact that I included the Antichrist in this book, the child version of the Antichrist, because don't I know who the Antichrist is? Don't I know what he does? Don't I know how evil he is? And while she came to like Lucy as a character, she wished that I had gone a different direction. And then she ended the email by saying, her sign off, but I did not mind the homosexuals. And I was flabbergasted by that, because in my head, here was this bigoted woman who didn't want to read this gay book with the Antichrist, but she got so offended by the Antichrist that she forgot to be mad about the gays. And that was totally okay with me. I was totally fine with that. And then on the flip side of that, this book came out in March 17th of 2020, right when the pandemic started. In the fall of 2020, I got an email or a Facebook message, and I never checked those messages. I rarely use Facebook, so I wasn't even sure how I clicked on it, but I did. And it was a message from a dad. And he had put his notes in brackets saying, what follows is from my 8-year-old son. And underneath that was this huge stream of consciousness block of text. It was basically like a book report from this kid telling me about how he read the book, what he loved about the book, what his favorite parts were. And then at the very end of this email, he said, This book made me feel better because I've been very lonely. I can't see my friends because everybody's sick. And this made me feel like I had my friends again. And then he ended it with, would you like to see my Chauncey costume? Of course, forgetting I was talking to a child, I wrote back and said, hell yes, I want to see your Chauncey costume. Immediately apologized because I was remembering talking to an 8-year-old boy. His dad was totally chill. And then he showed me this picture of this kid for his Halloween costume in 2020 wearing a full green spandex bodysuit. He had painted or he had attached suckers on his arms for the tentacles, and he had painted 2 green paper towel holders green and put golf balls on the top of his head. This kid had made this costume himself. And at that point in time, I knew maybe I'd had some trouble dealing with the fact that children were reading this book. But after that, I realized that this book especially, should be for anyone who wants to read it, regardless of their age, regardless of where they came from. Is this book considered adult? Yes, because the main character, Linus, is 40 years old. But this book, like any good fairy tale, at least to me, can be read by anyone, anywhere, and this book can be set anywhere and anywhen. I wanted to be very clear that it was a happy ending, that it was a good ending for them, but also to intimate that it would not resolve everything, because that's not how life works. Would they still face bigotry in the future? Of course. You can't change everybody's mind at the drop of a hat. That's not life. But I wanted to give them the tools in order to be able to continue to exist after I was done with them, to be able to know that there may be tough stuff ahead, but at the end of the day, they're still together. They're still happy. Every one of them have each other. And maybe we'll go back to them again one day, maybe we won't. And if that doesn't happen, then at the very end of the day, I wrote them the ending that they deserved. I think that people in my community, people in marginalized communities as a whole, need to see their people being able to be happy just like everybody else. I want to give hope to people like me, people who used to be like me when I was a kid, people who are at that age now and feel somewhat hopeless, because the world in 2023 is more advanced than where we have ever been. There are still obviously some huge issues going on right now, but what I don't think a lot of people understand is that not every young person now has access to the internet, has access to communities where they can talk to people like them. There are still, and especially in rural areas, there are still very limited avenues for young people to explore themselves. And one big part of that is online, and that can be scary. That can be scary, especially when you're a queer kid and you don't get, say, sex education in school and anything like that, and you go to the internet to learn about how you're supposed to be. And that's not how that should be, because there's some stuff on there that nobody should be seeing or is not representative of how a good person acts.